That's a $200 award. Very good. So the final special speaker of our event is Mr. Frank Gardner. Mr. Frank Gardner, motor racing driver extraordinaire. Frank, as he's coming forward, we're honouring Frank today because of his special interaction, partly with us at Griffith University and our research that we're conducting, but also because of his lifetime of experience in motor driving. Let me just give you some insight into who Frank is here. He's been in the sport for 40 years, that's motor driving at high speeds, 40 years. Has been works driver for Porsche, or is that Porsche? Lola, General Motors, Ford, Brabham and Lotus. He was the first driver in the world to chalk up 100 wins in international driving. First driver. Twice British champion, racing driver. 3 times British Saloon Car champion. European Formula 5000 champion. Won the European Formula 2 championships, the European Touring Car Championship and the European Saloon Car title. He was developmental engineer for the Lola Car Company, then the world's largest manufacturer of racing cars, and developed and tested some 200 racing cars each year. He was an engineer. Frank returned to Australia in 1975 to develop the Chevrolet Corvair sports sedan, in which he won the 1977 Australian Sports Sedan Championship. Frank retired, he will have us believe, from actual racing in 1977. Perhaps to give the rest of the world a chance to win some races, I suspect. He remained in motor racing on the team management side of things, provided courses in motor racing and advanced driving, and especially road safety with regard to driving. Today, Frank is managing director, and he helped set up the Performance Driving Centre, the PDC, at Norwell here on the Gold Coast, just behind Dreamworld. His book, Drive to Survive, provides scientifically sensible techniques on how to increase, among other things, postural stability in the car during driving and at high speeds and low speeds, both in terms of biomechanical and motor control perceptual constraints. As I said, we have ongoing research proposals. We have a grant, ARC grant, to study driving with Frank and his colleague at the back, Russell White. Where's Russell? There it is. Russell White will be our main liaison person. If you've ever wondered about the term motor control, and I will tell you I've wondered whether that's an appropriate term, motor control. After all, we don't consist of motors, not normally conceived as motors anyway. Well, if you've wondered about that, then take heart, because Frank will show you that motor control is alive and well, especially since motors need to be controlled under demanding task constraints, but they also must reach their goal and preferably win. So I give you Frank Gardner. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. We always open the situation by telling people that the world is absolutely full of brilliant drivers and colossal lovers. People know it all in both departments. We can't help you out with your love life, but we've had a long time in motor cars, development, driving skills, and watched the whole automobile world change. And along with that, the cutting edge of it, of course, is racing cars. A racing car is like going to war. You have to have a better armament than the enemy, or you're not in the war for long. And racing cars work that way, from the very early stages to the sophistication of onboard computers to wind tunnels to all kinds of things. But alongside this, you have to have the people to impart the knowledge to develop the cars to work hand in hand with the engineers. And it doesn't matter at what level you are, you still have to have a Michael Schumacher to come back in a split-second world to tell you where your problems are in your vehicle, whether it is suspension, aerodynamic, and what have you. Having arrived at all this, you then basically need a technique to be able to impart this knowledge, because it is a split-second world. And of course, in any journey of 1,000 miles, there has to be a first step. And the first step in driving to get to any skill stage is learning a little bit about a technique, because practice is fine, it's knowing what to practice. And the basics of any driving is you do not stand on the deck of a ship with your legs together, because the thing moves, there is no support. You don't run around the corner with your hands up there. You find a level that the body's comfortable with. You don't give yourself a bias in a car, because once you give a bias, that is the way you take your evasive action. So you try and keep yourself square in the motor car. And when we get to the stuff that moves on a little bit in the speed section, before any car slides, the tyres go light. But the only way you are ever going to feel the tyres go light is to get the posture sorted out, so you are working with your car and not against your car. Because once you move a wheel, you upset your tyre pattern. Of a tyre that is comfortable on the road with a good footprint, you move the wheel, you disturb the casing and the contact patch of the tyre, and you can bring a full handprint down to 2 fingers very quickly. So you breed your own instability. By virtue of the fact, ignorance is a great contributor to accidents. And you have to teach people intake of information. The person who can concentrate all the time, he or she is yet to be born. So you have to have a nice little key built into the system where you can go from a relaxed mode to a concentration mode. And all those things have to be applied. Getting back to system number 1, practice is fine as knowing what to practice. Now, the reason we can stand up here with some authority and talk upon what is the right thing to practice, originally I was on a design team with a car, the Mustang, the very first ones in America, and that was the first package with a good power-for-weight ratio that went quite quickly on old cross-ply tyres long before the radials came in, drum brakes, they didn't stop that well, but the power of the V8 was reasonably formidable for a car of that make. And once you start letting things out like that, you will always get people start to experiment with what it can do with no skills. So the first thing off the rank was a Mustang, closely followed by a series of big accidents where the design team was evaluating their engine installation, their transmissions, their seating positions, their door opening catches, because you have to have about a dozen cars out for evaluation for the various design teams. It didn't take long for that number to be reduced to about half a dozen mobile ones. So my boss in those days was a man called Lee Iacocca, and he said, get a drive program organised. And so starting a drive program was reasonably difficult, but it wasn't so bad because we were involved in making a lot of the componentries in research and development for the moon landing, mixed up with people like Colonel John Glenn, Buzz Aldrin and people of that era. So behind them was a big analysis team which were working away on aircraft carriers and coordination, tension, field of vision, the effects of adrenaline pumping. For argument's sake, when a pilot took off the deck of an aircraft carrier, flew on a sortie for 2 hours, the aircraft carrier is steaming down the waterways at about 25 knots, and in 2 hours conditions can alter from the oar, the pitch, the roll of the aircraft carrier. So the landing is going to be a lot more difficult than the takeoff if the conditions start to close in from visibility onwards, cloud cover and what have you. There's nothing out like merging out of about a 10/10 cloud cover up to 500 feet to land yourself on a postage stamp. You do pick up a little bit of adrenaline, and the moment you pick up adrenaline, in comes your field of vision. So the documentation has proven. And the field of vision comes in where you start to use the controls of the aircraft, much the same as a car, for your support. And It is designed to guide the aircraft. It's not there for your support, but tension takes over. Then you try to fly the thing on mechanical means, i.e. the artificial horizon. Failure to note the angle of the aircraft carrier in a roll, which you have to use the thermals off the deck to have the aircraft move with the thermals. So you're correcting against the very thing that the aircraft carrier is setting up. So the aircraft carrier rolls one way, you're correcting it, dips a wing into the deck of the aircraft carrier, and Catherine wheels over the side of the aircraft carrier, or, across the deck or somewhere. So a lot of that research cut down the amount of accidents per landing. I think they started off with 1 accident per 10,000 landings, and they eventually got it out with getting the correct posture, the correct intake of information. They got it out to 1 accident in 1.5 million landings. So just that particular bit of research, which was carried on into motor cars, proved extremely beneficial, because you then start with the whole basics of teaching people how to sit in cars, how to work with your car, not against it, how to apply brakes, how to even use an indicator. You give the average person untrained and you say, use the indicator on your car to make a move. You come up behind the cars in front of you at a reasonable speed, and you say to the individual, well, how do you use the indicator? Well, you just move it up because you're going to turn right. But it's not that simple, because all cars have a 25% blind spot in them. So you perceive what is going to take place, you look, you assess, then you indicate, then you move the car out, because in that looking and assessment gives, if there are any dynamics alongside you with an overtaking vehicle, it gives you time to get rid of the blind spot, to move out and not cause an incident on the highway, especially with freeways coming up. Because originally with racing drivers, to train to get the right picture in your mind and get the brain trained to know what you are supposed to observe and what are the issues, it is like a camera. And the relevant things, who is going to overtake, what car is positioned here on the track at speed in a split-second world. It is amazing when you give an untrained individual, say, close your eyes, now tell me what's behind you and tell me what's in front of you. They can't do it, because that side of the brain has never been developed. So it is a camera that you can close your eyes, and it's surprising how much, I don't suggest you do it on a freeway or a motorway, but at a closed set of conditions and a controlled set of conditions like we have, it's surprising how well you can develop a brain to photograph, to say these are the issues that need to be observed for survival. In my time, with the training I had for some very good people, I did never want to be the quickest man in the world, I just wanted to be the oldest. And there's a vast difference. A vast difference, believe you me. And the whole controlling factor in any car, once you've got the posture, once you have learned to work with your vehicle, is there is always a fuse box in your brain. If in doubt, don't. And it's training yourself to accept. Because at high speed, if you are running a vehicle at high speed, the little bit of road you miss on the inside is a bit that's not available when you get to the outside. So if you are on the limit and your tyres have gone light, and the idea of any fast lap is to be able to carry your car up until the tyres go light, then to be able to keep it there on the corner, and not that corner, the next corner, the next corner, the next corner. But you better bear in mind that the vehicle is on the limit of adhesion. So if you've missed the road on the inside and you persevere with that limit of adhesion, when you get to the outside, there's no more grippy bits. The black bits have disappeared. You are then on the grass. And when you hit the grass with light tyres, you just accelerate. And the next thing to stop you is usually a barrier. And if you are, and it's a very slow corner on a race circuit that's not around 100 mile an hour. or break that down into kilometres or do whatever you like. So if you go off and hit the grass at 100 miles an hour, you are in for an accident. You never know how bad it's going to be till you've had it. And of course, in those things, in being bred and always having the adventurous type of individual who didn't know the techniques, and one of the very, very important things is when you get to a certain technique is your feet must always be ahead of your hands. You must never be moving your hands ahead of your feet. In other words, when you get on the brakes, which is a millisecond accelerator to brake, because if you've had an accident in a race car and you have broken a foot or you've done damage to ligaments, the chances are your career could be at the crossroads because your feet don't move quick enough anymore. So the millisecond between accelerator and brake is very important, because when you sign a professional contract for a manufacturer, they don't care where you come as long as it's first. The rules are very simple. So therefore you not only have to have the IQ to cope with the technology around you, you also have to have the physical attributes to run and maintain the stamina to keep the vehicle up to the condition of the tyres are light most of the time and your feet in front of your hands, i.e. hitting the brake steers the car, so then you correct it. The foot's hit the brake pedal first, then you correct your car. When you hit the accelerator steers the car, then you correct it. But you mustn't be ahead of your accelerator or you've got a double action, because the accelerator steering, you've probably corrected it slightly the wrong way. So that costs you time and it doesn't stack up to a success story. Then it's hard on your tyres. And then when you get to speeds of, say, 200, Le Mans, in the last year I done Le Mans in the Ford cars. They were a GT car with no wings, no drag factor. They were very slippery through the air. We were doing in the night when the air cooled down and the temperatures were right for the big V8 engine to be sucking in cold air and not hot air, which considerably impairs the performance. So while you can keep cold air rushing in, an engine develops a lot more horsepower. We were doing, and it is on record, I was flying back to England recently, and they had a whole picture of the car with a man called Sir John Whitmore and myself that drove this car, and it said between the hours of 2:15 and 4:30 in the morning, in light, mist and rain, we were recorded regular at over 258 miles an hour. That equates to well over 400 kilometres an hour. But you don't shift your chewing gum too far, and you do maintain your, and you've got to be sure that you don't dehydrate, because at those sort of speeds, you don't go for your drink bottle, you have to find a part of the circuit where you can actually pull yourself back into reality and take on, because you are dehydrating all the time, so your intake of liquids is quite high, and you're stuck in these things for 2-hour shifts where you must concentrate and your headlamps and conditions are changing, so therefore it's impossible to relax, and yet you must be relaxed, because if you're not part of your vehicle at those speeds and the conditions, I say, are changing, sometimes the road's a little wet, a little more greasy than it is in other parts. So to maintain your lap times, and then if you get fog come down on some corners, and Le Mans is a long way around, it's not as far as Nürburgring in Germany, but it's a long way around. And you sometimes, if the fog comes down in belts, you must know where your hand position is, so you can go 1 and 2 and 3 and straighten up, because you still got to keep your lap times going. And that you've spent your whole practice and the daytime shifts memorising that circuit, so you know when to turn in, where your braking area is and everything. The tail lights of overtaking vehicles show up very well in a fog, and you know the vehicle's there. The big trick is to work out which side of the road the tail lights are on when you're closing in a fog. So once again, you have to be totally relaxed. Your brain has to be ahead of the thing. And with all that lot going on and the accidents that sort of thing caused, of course, the vehicle improved enormously. The wings came, the downforce came, and vehicles got themselves a lot safer. And the flame-proof overalls were invented, the full-face helmets were invented, the pads to keep the noise out of your head so you could think, because in the early stages there were no earplugs. All, for every accident there's been an enormous amount of progress, which leads back to road cars, because people learn from the road cars to the race cars what construction of tyre worked best under what conditions, why it worked, the durability of it, the seriousness of the rubber. And originally we had a lot of carbon in tyres. When road tyres got down less than halfway, they became quite dangerous because the rubber went hard. And then in the hands of a young person that buys a relatively cheap car, no technique, greasy night, in way above their limit. And we can prove this with normal people that you think have a good head on their shoulders. We run a braking test at work. The failure rate's 100%. People think in an emergency they can stop, but they can't quite stop. And can't quite stop only by 8 feet. But 8 feet into a concrete wall or a double-decker bus or whatever have you is a long way in. And once again, it lacks technique, because people can't come from a relaxed mode to a concentration mode. You can't look at your watch and say, 2:05, Mrs. Jones will back out of her driveway and I will be ready to take evasive action. It doesn't work like that. It's an accident because you're caught by surprise. And with surprise, the normal thing is to grab the wheel and hang on. Well, in grabbing the wheel comes the block out from the brain, and therefore there's no further thinking. And if you grab the wheel like that when you go in, I drive a neurosurgeon around, a man called Professor Watkins, and I still do this at Grand Prix. And Professor Watkins is a neurosurgeon. There are only 2 people in the world with the qualifications of Professor Sid Watkins. His counterpart is in America. That these people do a lot of research on motor accidents. They find when a car hits the wall like that, the people there, you tear the ligaments there and break the wrist there. You can't dial for the tow truck. We do teach the thumbs in there, the palm of the hand on there, so the hands come off and the knuckles hit the dash, and at least they're skinned, but everything's in one piece to get on the mobile or whatever you need to do to dial the tow truck at least. But you cannot, with people unable to itemise and picking up tension, and adrenaline goes back, according to the Americans, to the days of caves, where we all lived up caves and a bear came up to eat the family and we picked up a hunk of wood, and adrenaline gives you the strength of 10 people type of thing on a very short span to be able to attack the bear, save the family. But when you start pumping adrenaline in motor vehicles, which is brought about through quick gear changes, pumping yourself up to beat the car out at the traffic lights and a whole heap of things. It's great. It gives a little bit of courage or road rage or whatever you like in this day and age, but it certainly doesn't fit in with the technique of driving a vehicle. So the whole thing, you can't have a singular approach to vehicle safety. And despite the fact of people like Mercedes, BMW and the upmarket vehicles that have got anti-locking brakes of a high sophistication, they have skid control arrangements, lock related. In other words, if you use too much lock on a corner and you're going a little bit quickly, the management system says, hey, and just decelerates the car because the amount of lock you're using is too quick for the speed you're doing. So the management system senses all this, and you can jump on the brakes and it will level the car out, and it will take care of an awful lot of things, and this is what you pay your money for. And even if you had your accident, the chances of you being hurt with side airbags, front airbags, apart from a little bit of bruising from the airbags igniting, the chances are you will be all right, and you'll be able to walk away from the wreckage and get a photograph of it going away on the tow truck. But it still doesn't alter the fact that the person that caused the accident in the first place, through lack of information, through lack of training, through lack of everything, and it gets back to a golfer. If you want to learn to play golf, and cars are the same, if you want to go into a professional level, at what handicap do you want to play off? Because there is a technique to learn and practice. The only difference with a golf course is you are there and you're hitting golf balls, and so they're flying off at different angles and you're not scoring. You need a bloody pocket calculator to work out what you've done in between holes. With a car, it can turn out to be of dire consequences. You can hurt yourself. And in the early stages, the ignorance of cars, I can remember driving many years back Formula cars with an alley fuel tank either side of you. And to do the 200 mile, a Grand Prix was 200 mile or 2 hours, which came first. And those rules still apply. The only problem is a Grand Prix never runs into 2 hours these days with a modern car. You do your 200 miles very quickly. And of course Grand Prix always finish within the hour and a bit over an hour and a half. You've done a Grand Prix, but in the old days the cars weren't quite up to it with tyres and all kinds of things, and 2 hours, if you struck wet conditions, you could be out there for 2 hours 10 minutes, 2 hours 15 minutes. So you had to carry the fuel and the supplement tank. The two alley tanks are alongside you. The supplementary tank to supply those two was stuffed over the sort of family jewels, and the pickup tank was underneath your boat. So if you did make a mistake and went in and hit something that would ignite, because compression ignition was quite easy with alley fuel tanks, because the moment they compressed and sprung a leak and hissed the warm fuel out, which had gained temperature through the engines and stuff like that, had yourself an explosion. So you were very, very, very likely to attend your own barbecue. And they had little things like straw bales around circuits. And I mean, a car going into straw bales with half tanks of petrol, you could keep that fire going for days. So it's really a talk on how far it has all come. Because when we looked at those things and the goggles that we had, they were glass metal frames. If the glass didn't get you in the eye, the metal frame went through your brain. So we had all these beautiful devices built in to make sure the mortality rate in that era was quite high. It just went on, and we had lovely things like wooden steering wheels. Whoever thought of driving a wooden steering wheel in this day and age? Because if you went into anything and the wheel broke, you ended up with a handful of splinters penetrating into all parts of your hand. And then you had helmets that had little pieces left out of them so you could hear your engine. And in the early days, being on the grid, if you'd had a bad practice and you were back on about the third row and you got all these exhaust pipes cracking you, because it was before the age of, and Grand Prix still are allowed freedom of exhausts, but you get a V12 or a V16 cracking in your ears prior to the man dropping the flag, the noise is horrendous. It makes any noisy disco seem like Noddy in Toyland. The vibrations, I've actually been on grids and seen the leaves in England in autumn time coming off the trees because of the crack of the exhaust pipes. And we used to leave holes out of the helmet because they thought that was the thing to do. And of course all race drivers, people like our own Jack Brabham, who I've just finished a meeting with about 2 hours ago, you have to shout at the man all the time. He's now in his 70s, says he, Mick, of him, who's standing up here in the 70 mark. But Jack is totally deaf, and he has to have 2 hearing aids and stuff like that. You can shout out at Jack and say, how are the times at Monaco? Who's on the front row of the grid? And Jack will say, it's 2:15. So all this damage and things like that. And there's a bloke who's 3 times world champion, made his own motor cars, and I drove some of them for him. And we've worked together since Speedway days of 1947 through till this era now. So it's a few summers and lots of winters to be around motor cars. And the reason people like myself are hauled along, it's like your old clothes. If you keep them in the wardrobe long enough, they'll come back into fashion. That in travelling through all the eras, you can take an overview and you can understand where the progress has come from, the need for it, and it is still progressing as of today. You go along to the pit in a modern pit area today and you'll get a Michael Schumacher in between practices skipping just to free his footwork up so he's right for the next practice.